let me start with this. First, fantasy. Fantasy is, first of all, is artists. I think we're the last of the magicians. Magic is what it is. Fantasy is sympathetic magic. And we create things that people, we bring them into a world that doesn't exist. It's magic. And let me give you, I think in many respects, I have some advantage in a way, but it's like previous generations, like a lot of the illustrations I'm going to show you are from guys that were trained and worked at 1800s, early 1900s. My teachers were all, not all, but I see many of them were born in the 1800s. But beyond that, the world we lived in was different. We had to take and do more imagining. I'm before television. We had no television. When I was a kid, we'd run home from school to listen to the radio. And we would have all these Buck Rogers, all these different things going on. We would imagine them. And I remember even before that of taking and collecting the Sunday comics and waiting for the Sunday comics to take and collect the Prince Valiant stories and trying to make my own fantasy and comic strips at that time. Now we're talking about 7, 8 years old, 9, in fantasy land. Okay, so that's the big thing. But you know, if you go back and we look at the cave paintings, really the first bit what we might say communication outside of the talking spoken word, visually, with artists, with taking and being magical. The cave, these animals are going down. I've been down into the caves in France and looked at the animals that were the cave drawings. And if you go down into those things, then you can see them with like a torch, the way they did. And we're talking about you having to crawl into these spaces where they were drawing these animals. And if you're moving a light in there along these surfaces, these animals come alive. It really is magic. And so I think that we take and we see images in nature everywhere. I mean, it's okay. I'm a Finn, okay? The Finnish basically were shamans. And I was thinking, when I was thinking about doing this thing, I was thinking about, well, you know, I sit outside and I see the wind blowing the trees, and to me, they're talking to each other. There's a mystery that's taking place within these things. We see things, we try to give answers to what's going on. And so man has this ability to take and project his feelings and is trying to create an understanding of the world around them by putting into the objects that we are surrounded with as having meaning. And that's so much like reading the Tasman, so like they would do always taking people doing the magic, looking at the stars, the whole thing. It's all magic. But the trick is we've got to get it out of our head down onto the paper. That's the thing. So, you know, I've done a lot of my early paintings, a very large part of them. I was always dealing with like flying figures, things, and feeling sort of a psychological effect of how things relate to each other. That's art. That's aesthetics. the effect that shapes and lines and tones make on each other. That's really where the art experience is. And actually the definition of art is really the expression of man. And so it's our expression, but it's our feeling about things that makes it really the thing happen. And so one of the things that I've done in the past, and I think every parent, I've got 5 children, I have 9 grandchildren. And as a parent and a grandfather, you're telling stories and taking and drawing at the same time that you're telling the story to take and communicate, because it's the drawing that communicates what's really, it becomes alive. And it's that as you're doing the drawing, it's coming alive and taking and explaining the story. Okay, so where do we get a lot of this stuff? I'm sitting. I made a bunch of notes for myself. I sort of like, okay, I'm not normally something I'm talking, lecturing about on. I'm not lecturing. I'm talking. Okay, nature. Like I was trying to get across, nature is the primary element that we look to. Words is the thing, is one of the ways of like creativity. Da Vinci talked about taking and looking at the water spots on a wall to imagine. I have this is a bag of rocks and sticks and things that I can use to take and create and draw from. And you start imagining things, just smearing things on the paper. What you're doing is it's like a Warsaw test. You're taking and bringing things out. You're seeing into something, what's in a sense, in your psyche. And that's what we do. One of the things that I find that it's actually sort of a disturbing element is that so many of the young artists are taking and spending most of their time looking at other artists trying to do the same thing. And there's a whole thing of copying. We start looking at dragons. Well, everybody's drawing the dragons. Same kind of dragon. It's as if this is what a dragon really looks like, rather than the imagination. And that's where we have to take, and instead of copying the other guy, we need to take and go out of our head. See, that's where we have absolute freedom within our mind to do whatever we want to do. We can fantasize, and that's what it is. It's fantasy. So, and as we work, then we build on these things. So I'm going to go through and we'll talk about a few of these things, but let's take and start here. Now, where fantasy begins, it can be from all kinds of different things. This is pretty fanciful. Okay, this is Hieronymus Bosch. So now, in this case, the fantasy is about it was a basically religious thing. What are the things that are against or bad in religion? The fantasizing and the imagery and creating that is pretty amazing stuff. You look at it. So what can be, what is the impetus for taking and making a fantasy? What is the story? What's behind it? Where do you start? Well, magic, that I was talking about the cave paintings, primitive man, magic was a means of taking and controlling or having an answer for the uncontrollable elements of nature. We're trying to control, we're trying to understand things. So we create these magical things that, it's like taking in, if you're taking and throwing rocks or not stepping on cracks type thing. You take and there's a child, as a child, I watch my grandchildren now taking and playing with a couple of dolls and the conversation going on between the dolls and the cars and all this imagining stuff that is going on, this dialogue with themselves. And this is what we need to take and try to do more. We need to take and find an excuse to take and break the mold the way we do things. And remember, there aren't any rules. There aren't rules for any of this. And that's where we tend to, and that's what what I started trying to get across, is that there's a tendency to think that there's a specific kind of look that it's supposed to be. It's not. The freshness comes from your own thing out of here and making yourself. We don't, for fantasy, you can't censor yourself. You can't say, no, that doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. You have to take it and just let it happen. See where it takes you. That's the whole process of fantasy. And so we taking it becomes a stream of elements that are taking and going through. It's like doing a graphic novel. You start out with something and you just keep going with it. I was going to look at, if you have questions, by the way, just bring them up.
Yes. Glenn, there is a question. Would you like to
I'm reading. I'm reading the one from Ruben here.
Yeah, it's trying to see the genre more about the origins of myth and symbol. Does that dictate the visual style, or is it more about having freedom in creating and expressing?
Yeah, it's the style. The style is the artist's signature. And see, so much of what when we're looking at something, is the artist here, Bosch, the technical stuff is just, that any painter at that time had that same technical skill. So it's a style. It's surprising that, and I have another Bosch here. Let's look at this. This is so wild. Look, taking and looking at that. This sort of a detail from imagination. Now, what's surprising is that he was taking and talking about the evils. Is a Christian, all the things you shouldn't be doing that are going to end up putting you in hell. Okay, so but we look at this stuff, but he was incredibly popular within the religious circles. He really but he was able to take and really break through any kind of formula of what things should be, because taking this as a whole, taking that mouth and pulling it open, and then having these things, that is really amazing. And so, and a lot of times, as a painter and as a teacher, one of the things that I try to communicate is that first, art is based on art. We look at art and our tools, the styles that we use, pretty much your contemporary things. Today, for instance, the using of the iPad or film. Film is a major element in our fantasy world. We all take and are looking at film, and we see things, and the combining of elements together to take and create this experience. And so, some respects, one of the main elements that I talk about as a teacher is taking in is composition, how we organize things, but how do we focus? How do we make the eye see? And it's the abstract in itself that is taking and communicating an experience. And so we look at these now. Most of when we go back and let's look at some more of here. Here, for instance, this is again Bosch. You look at this is a big triptych. This is a big church painting, and you look at you go in and start seeing. No, this is this is not. This is the heaven of the good stuff, you know. And so we're talking about all of the elements in here. But then you got the underworld, you got the devils, you've got all of this stuff playing. And it's this constant taking in. One of the things that we see when you're looking at it, and here you can see, like, for instance, the clam. There's the juxtaposing nature and humans, of animals, of objects and things together, which is one of the basic techniques, if you might say, of taking and fantasizing. You give a situation, you say, well, okay, let's take like a classroom exercise. Let's take, okay, combine a couple of different kind of animals together. Okay, that's a technique. It's sort of a standard thing. Well, here we find out he's taking in humans and clams or shells or all kind of juxtapositions of things. These are all the plants, taking and turning bugs into things. We make movies out of bugs, ants, okay? But it's this creating, we're giving a human element to it. Okay, myth. Yes, that's for myth. Myth is the means of storytelling. Okay, like if you take and look at the various epic poems of different countries of how the world was created and what have you. Okay, we have the Christian version, but okay, in Finland we have an epic poem called the Kalevala. It has nothing to do with Christianity or German or Swedish. It's all unique in itself, but it was all passed on by taking and the oral history for centuries. It wasn't even written down until the 1700s. So this myth and this nature is coming through. When we're out walking, we see things in things. Like I was saying, I can feel the trees talking to each other. And you're looking at the marks on the barks of a tree. You can see these faces coming out. You can see the eyes, the mouth. We recognize, we see these things in everything. And it's the thing, it's like drawing from clouds. Done a lot of that. Later on, I'll show some cloud drawings. And we can take and be fanciful about it. But here, you look at this stuff, and it's completely out of the realm of what we would take and think about. And yet, you look at the style. It's a very straightforward illustration type of style. He's making images, but the images themselves and how they react with each other, that's the whole thing. It's like when you look at this thing in the center here, talk about fanciful. Wow. It's pretty amazing. And the animals that he comes through, the taking and things. So as we go through these things, let's look at some more here. Howard Pyle. Now, here if you read a little bit about some of these artists, you find, okay, he was really he became a teacher. A lot of Andrew Wyatt and a lot of other people took and were his students. He influenced a lot of people. But where did he come from? How did he come to this thing? Well, as a young child, or as a kid, he was really just intrigued by the idea of pirates. And he started researching pirates. He went to the Caribbean. He delved into this whole world of pirates. So when we look at the illustrations that he did, they're steeped in this idea of the pirates and the romantic world that they existed in and the dramatics of the whole thing. And so the style, they're oil painting. Okay? And he pushed the whole thing of fantasy. It is fantasy. And but he communicates, able to communicate the experience that we're looking at it, but he's doing it using artistic tools. And you look at this thing, we can see there's the areas of simple areas against complex areas, the warm and the cool colors, all of the basic stuff we teach in art school. But the image comes from this being involved with something that he was really interested in. And that's I think has to do with it, is that in a way, and that's why I'm trying to take and push the idea that to take and delve into your own fantasy world. Yeah, like animators tend to look at nothing but animation. That's not very healthy. Okay, is that you should be taking and expanding what you look at. You should be taking and focusing on following everybody always get the okay, follow your own drummer, that's what you got to do. And you take and you be focused on something that you personally believe in. And it can be now in imagery, we don't know. You don't know until you put it down. I had a situation happen with me. I was had a good friend who was a painter. He stayed with me in between trips to mental hospital, but he was maybe he was a prominent painter, well known, and about maybe 10, 15 years older, and we argued incessantly. And finally, he said, "Look, do me a favor, do a painting, okay, for me." And I said, "Okay." So I started to get a canvas, put it up. Now, no, you can't do that, but you normally do. I don't want you to do anything that you would normally do. And what he did, he said, so I got out some illustration board and put that up on the easel. And I started taking, okay, I'm still going to use my, no, you can't use your oil paint. Okay, and anyway, everything I tried to do, I could not do because that's something I'm comfortable with. That's what I knew. So as I ended up taking and doing this painting. It was, 24 by 30, standard heavy duty illustration board. I used pastel, ink, water, a big gesso with a brush on the thing, combining all these things. But before I started, okay, with my right hand, Can't use your right hand. That's what you would normally do. Well, this was one of the hardest things I ever did. Every movement I started to make was my natural inclination to do. So I had to not do that. I had to do something that didn't fit. at the end of I did this thing, painting. Hated it. Okay. So then I took and I framed it and I put it on the wall. Okay. And at the end, the thing, I kept looking at it. Well, gee, the more I looked at it, the more interesting things start happening. Well, pretty soon, a lot of the stuff I had done in that thing started creeping into the rest of the stuff I was doing. But it was totally unnatural for me. It was totally completely against my training. And I was way out of my comfort zone. But that experience taught me a lot. And I did a series of paintings after that. And I learned a lot from taking and being pushed to get away from what I would normally do. And that's the idea, is that you take and you have to get away from what your conventions are. That's where the fantasy starts to happen. That's where we start to see things that we didn't see before. And that it's art. The artists were like, well, we have to make this magic happen. Sometimes it's not easy. It's not convenient as to taking. And that's where I'm saying that don't be so preoccupied with looking how everybody else makes a hero. Now, maybe the heroes don't look the same way. One of the things is there's this magic that happens in taking and creating something. I think to me one of the best films to me was I can think of a Disney film, a Pixar film, was Wall-E, Wall-E, and where this sort of a romance takes place between these. You really built into experiencing this thing. I think of the first sort of, like, we might think of an animated sort of a jump that happened. I think John Lasseter took and had these two lamps going. And I remember John talking about this. He says, we're making these two lamps. And somebody asked him when these lamps are taking and pushing this ball back and forth. And he says, once when he asked, which one's it? What is it? The mommy or is it the daddy? And the minute that he knew, he got something. Well, what did he get? He got that the audience was now taking and looking at these inanimate objects as real, as alive. That is magic. That is really fantasy. So we do this with the drawing. We do it with the tools that we have, that we are skills. Okay. So when you look at Pyle's painting now, is that, okay, he was really gifted at taking and being able to take and communicate a sense of a reality that really didn't exist, or not in that form. And the idea of the ship burning and the pirates and the smaller boat and the whole thing that's going on. Okay, so that is fantasy. That is magic. Okay, Arthur Rackham. Now, this is one of those people that animation people look at a lot. But again, it's taking and he creates a world, that we can take and he believe in. Like, look at his dragon there. It's very different. It's not the dragon that we. It's not a Disney dragon, and it's something different. But then, see, this is where there's a difference in some respects. Rackham was a illustrator with a unique take on things, but he was illustrating a story. And this is one of the things that in the business is that everything's, in a sense, the cliches, everything starts with the story. Well, not necessarily. Okay, one of the great story writers, okay, we think Hans Christian Andersen. And so many of the illustrations that the stories that he would take and tell and create were first, and this is something that I've taught in Denmark quite a few times, actually. And we went to his Andersen's home where he was born and raised. His father was a shoemaker, very, very poor. And he really had a struggle. But what he would do when he was going on and he would traveling, once he started making, because he was started with theater. He wanted to be in the theater, but he was sort of a gangly guy. But he found somebody gave him a chance. Okay, but once he sort of made it in a way, instead of taking and writing a story and then illustrate it, he started from the opposite end. He would take and do little drawings. He carried in his pocket stacks of paper and small cards and stuff that he would then take and do these little drawings. The drawings were the impetus for the story, not the story for the drawing. It was different. And that, which is a way of taking and coming out. Like I said, one of the things I used to do with the kids, I would take and have them put some scribbles on a piece of paper and then make something out of it. I mean, turn something in, make an image come out of those scribbles. And then that image then becomes the focus of a story. And then you start adding to that story and you start adding more characters and things that happen to it. And sometimes it's not starting with the story, but starting with an image that creates a story. That's a classic writer's trick. I know my daughter's working on her doctorate, in fact, but one of the techniques of the classroom techniques is to have a hat full of, or a bag full of different objects, keys, film stubs, different objects, and put your hand in, take out 3 objects, and then write a story based on those 3 objects. What's the thing? Where's the jumping off point? And it's a technique of taking and starting out with something. I talk about a lot of times taking in. I go to class. We say, well, you can't be in a studio and say, well, I have drawers a block. That doesn't work very well. You get paid by the hour, okay? Basic techniques is just put down something, then do the opposite, and then keep doing the opposite and the opposite of that. And after 5 tries, you're actually involved and you're actually doing something. And that's the process. That's the process of we taking, inventing, and creating, and doing. And it's we're magic. We're manipulating things. We're taking and putting up. We're putting like chemicals, this and that together to take and make something brand new. And that's what we deal with. So Rackham here, he's using again pretty much the imagery is fantasy. The story was somebody else's. Okay, but he's coming through, and now he's using basic artist techniques. He's using a foreground, middle ground, background, dark, light, dark. The arrangement, how he's working with these things. These are tools. These are the things. The technique is the freedom that it's almost like an engraver's or an etcher's technique with the pen. Well, that was part of the period, okay, of taking and doing black and white illustrations. And this sort of fantasy, this playing with the thing. And so we build on that. So that there aren't any rules. So if we take and go from there, take a look at, here we are again, asking. Now it's a different, notice this is a really straight illustration. He's taking, but he's got this playing of opposites here. Notice the girl in the bed and stuff, and then the character. It's a whole different, and the gesturing, pushing out, little pointing out about the thing. Storytelling, sort of a unique type. The technique, and this is one of this is where in animation we look a lot at him, and he was the technique, the pen drawing. Facilitated the whole approach for a lot of people in animation how to do it. But it's very skilled as an illustrator. He's taking and he's illustrating somebody else's story. He didn't write the story, but he's creating a new way of seeing the story. And so, but the way he'd be able to diagramming the space, the skills that he's got. So we have to have the basic skills, but you have to be careful at the same time. It's very easy to take and allow logic to get in the way. And we can't do that. It's out of perspective and stuff. Well, much of what we do is way out of perspective. But as long as you're taking and creating this imagery, it doesn't matter at that point. So you take and you focus on the absurd in a way, and you start to play, but you're playing differences. We don't know something is absurd unless we see it juxtaposed to what we would consider the normal. So that's taking two different worlds and putting them together. And it creates the fantasy then. Okay, it's like in a lot of the movies you see where the forest has got a menacing forest, the trees, and it creates this imagery that we're taking and going to be contained. And, well, again, talking about my grandchildren. Well, here we are at home. There's nothing dangerous here, except they're afraid to walk into the back bedroom if it's dark, because it's ominous. It's dark back there. Who knows what's going to jump out and devour them? Okay? fantasy. And we take and we work with these things, and we try to see how things live. Look at Charles Robinson again. Now, we have to realize that the style is okay. These art this is a period of Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau, with all of these guys now, was a big deal at the time. Art Nouveau was bringing art to the masses. The illustrator, the style of taking and working with the imagery. It was that was the imagery of the day. Okay, today we look at it, and again, it's the same thing, but there's a uniqueness to it. His vision was totally different than Raskin. The same day, same time. Okay, and how they think. But also you find that in the period, combining imagery from other cultures and throwing them in. Again, bringing up the idea of animated film. Another one of my favorite films now is Coco, the thing based on the whole thing of Mexico and the culture in the Mexican culture. Well, the art that was created in that is really different. And the whole involvement in bringing into it a sense of the culture into the work, taking and creating the sense of the culture and it became very educational. And looking at that film, the whole idea of taking into contact, maintaining contact with those who have passed. And I didn't realize a lot of stuff. Where I live, I drive down this canyon to wherever I go. I try not to take the freeway because it's easier, there's less traffic, and even though a lot of curves. Well, there's one spot there where some people have died in an accident. Well, there are crosses, and somebody's been very diligent. They actually set up chairs, and they've taken and put flowers there, and the whole culture of reminiscence and photographs of people who died, and it's been kept up. It's been there for quite a few years now, and not realizing the cultural aspects of that until I saw the film. And it was amazing now. So now that becomes a whole nother thing that you can take and bring into whatever you're doing. There's this other cultural thing that comes over. Okay, I mentioned I'm a Finn. We have the epic poem, the Kalevala. I mentioned that earlier. But again, there's stuff in there, the creation of the world, how the heron comes down and lays an egg on the woman's knee, who's in the ocean, and which when the eggs break, it creates the different land masses, and we get the yolk becomes the sun and the moon, and it's fantastic. It's a whole different culture, and it's unique. And so you absorb and you can start to, you're using these cultural elements to bring into your art. Well, the whole Art Nouveau, the whole period, had a lot to do with the interjection of Chinese, Japanese art. A lot of the papers, the things that were being shipped there were wrapped in like old prints and stuff, and people were start seeing that. So what we find, there's this bringing in, well, and here we look at this illustration. Well, we see a lot of the Eastern, the Russian, Slavic plays in there. So it's the cultural influences that you can bring into creating your fantasy. And you will find that, again, it'll take and open up the possibilities. So if we take and look some more here. Okay, this is a hokusai. Now, I'm sorry about the bad reproduction here. But hokusai was the first art book I ever bought was on hokusai. In fact, this was the book. And it's the idea. I tried not flatten it because I didn't want to ruin the thing. I'm sorry about the shadow, but in this thing here, one of the techniques, and this is again in reading the literature on it, that taking something and seeing what would happen. What's the usefulness of a long neck? Well, you can hang clothes on it. You can take and smoke without bothering anybody or creating a fire if you're in bed. There's all these things you can do. What's the advantage of having three eyes? Or all of these things are you taking? Well, what about having a long nose? What can you do with a long nose? Well, you can hang things on it. You can do all kinds of things. You could put a stick on it and write with it. But just by taking things, there's another one here where okay, this was a illustration imagining through what people have written about other cultures, about the thing. Okay, that you hear, you can see people who are you get two bodies in one combined in one figure. People with really long legs. Somebody's got wings. These are all, but these were based on stories about a different culture within our. We're seeing a foreign culture talking about, in a sense, our culture, or well, I guess whatever culture was, what people who had traveled taking and writing about these strange cultures. Well, if you go back and read some of the Greek historians, and they talk about traveling and talking about ants that were bringing up gold. There's all kinds of myths and things that be going on. The Cyclops. So there's this whole range of material that you can bring into what you're doing from other cultures. And you combine that within our culture or any culture that you happen to be in. And you start to see how you can see things from a very, very different point of view. And that's what you need to do, is to take and so we try to make films. That's what I said. The Coco film was one of the things that made it work was the effort taking and trying to understand a different culture, and to taking and looking at it from a sympathetic point of view. Yes, you just looking at how does everybody else see what we're doing, and so you're taking, you're turning, you're making, flipping things around, upside down, inside out, and trying to understand. But then the imagery that takes place within that. So here you can see, look at the figures with these really long legs and really long arms. Okay? So again, what if, what if dogs had legs on top and on bottom? Gee, I wonder how that would work. Okay. What about birds? Instead of two legs, had four legs. Okay. Which is actually, has nothing to do, this is sort of a funny thing. My son's mother-in-law was at the market, and she had these frozen chickens, and she just out of a whim, she asked the clerk, he says, "Are these front legs or back legs?" And the clerk stopped. I don't know. I have to go ask the manager. Well, of course, chickens don't have front and back legs, okay? And when she came back, she was really mad because she had been taken and basically made a fool out of. But the idea of being able to take and see things from a different perspective. We don't think of Maxwell Parrish in the same terms as fantasy, yet they were. Okay, I was working on the film Page Master, and I remember the designers had a whole bunch of Maxwell Parrish's illustrations on the wall as to give inspiration to things. So Maxwell Parrish is sort of a transition in a way because he did using the camera and using camera imagery and using the camera, working with photographs and working on photographs and creating things that didn't in reality exist. So that he's taking these things, singing to the moon, what have you, but it's a kind of imagery that was created, and it was unreal, but real at the same time. Photographs can lie like crazy. But if you use a photograph, it's a great tool, but don't let it use you. You use the photograph to take and do things. And that's, again, what we work with. Now here, this is Heath Robinson. Again, straightforward illustrator. But look at now he's using technique. And he's creating these, again, it's storytelling. He creates this whole sense of thing. Sometimes it's advantageous to take and even take something like this. Now I'm going to have a little fun here, and I'm going to draw one of the things that I had to take, and basically when I started working in animation, one of the things I had to do was suspend logic a lot of times, which, as I mentioned, the thing. So I look at this now. If I was going to take this, maybe what would happen if I take and you start with something. Yeah, say, okay, now, what about we got these figures going in? What if I take and I turn the road a little bit? What would that do? I'm trying to think, and I start to take and pull the branches and stuff coming over, and we got these little fingers. The minute, look at what happens now. The imagery, if I have these little figures going in here and back in, and we've created this space. Just by pulling these branches over creates an ominous quality to that. You're coming down and it's going to grab you. Psychologically, we experience that. And so then if I take and come in here and we say, oh, okay, we go here. Now I'm going to take and I make this door go really tall. Now we really feel this. And if I take this castle and I start to push it up this way, okay, and we start to play with the shapes and stuff, well, that takes and becomes a whole nother kind of imagery. And I could take and turn this then to, these become like teeth looking down. And we can take and feel, putting a line in here and make this opening. Boy, that becomes a scary thing. Just by taking and how you start to play with the images and making this part in here dark. And we start coming through. and we feel, we build. It's fun. Okay. So we constantly try, you're trying to take it, but it's the way you combine, it's the abstract elements that take and create the feeling, the cringe. Okay. Because it's how one line fits into another. And this is basic now. It's not just the imagery that you're working with, but it's how you draw it. It's the sense of how, what's the abstract, what's the design, if you want, element that takes and makes that experience uh, be something else. Okay? So as we look at these things, then, okay, this to me it has a lot of the characteristics of Hieronymus Bosch. It's the same kind of thing. And it's got all of these different things happening within it. And so you got devils, you've got things flying, you've got the very common things, you've got things going on up on the roofs, you've got multiple scenes going on at the same time. And the idea of even feeling the floating stuff. This is where you look at some of the Japanese animation and Kiki's flying service or whatever it was called. It's great because but one of the elements that he's doing is he takes and he gives very beautiful renderings. The illustrations are very real, and then he plops in something that's very unreal. It's really fantasy, and so it is this great combination, this great storytelling, and it's building up these elements. But it's hard. It's hard to come by. Okay, but he's again this fantasy stuff. Dulac. Now, again, now here you really see the introduction of imagery from another culture. And now we look at Arabic, the East, or India type of imagery coming through, and juxtaposing these images. The one on the right, this is Beauty and the Beast, very un-Disney-ish. Okay, and it's a whole different feeling to it. And so this is what one of the things that when you're looking at these is that there's a strong play of three-dimensional and the abstract. And like the one on the left, like you have this flying figure, it's like a butterfly with wings. And yet we have this flames, and you got the shape, and you got stars, and so there's no kind of rational space in the thing. You got things that are going forward. We do have overlapping, but it's primarily a two-dimensional sense of something. And so this sort of vivid color that takes and comes through. So again, but it's taking and I'm imagining and seeing. This is like I started out saying, that in many respects, we had an advantage before television, before all these images were showing you absolute. This is the way it is, and we fantasize things. In fact, it's like what happened when in the movies, when talkies came in, because before sound, the silent movies, we imagined what these actors sounded like. And then when they came on, we found that their voices didn't match the imagery. Somebody have a squeaky little voice, and there's supposed to be a big, tough hero. The voices didn't match. And it actually doomed a lot of artists or actors of the time. They didn't match. And so we look at things as the imagination of what's going on. So the Beauty and the Beast now, and we look at that, that's the Beast and the Beauty. But the characterization here is, wow, we have got so ingrained with this Disney look that this does not look, it doesn't match anymore. It's so unique. And the sentiment that you can feel between the things, that's a critical part of the thing. And this is one of the big elements that often we miss, is that there's the human characterization or sense of how parts relate to each other, how we take and communicate from one. It's the idea of a look having real meaning. If I take and I go and look over there, you're wondering, what was I looking at? Your mind goes off into the other room. Okay, so we look at these. I'm just looking at what's this number up here. Is this with questions? Oh, we do have a chat thing here. People have been. Let me bring this down. Kiki delivery service, yeah, amazing. And all of us feel Murakawa. It's really the whole thing. I'm just noticing in there, Marie brought up the idea of sisu. Sisu is a word. It's a Finnish word, and I've asked so many times. Like I lived in Finland when I was a child, and I didn't learn English until I started schools, and that's part of, I think. I thought it was a great advantage. I think and now as I look back, because when we came back to the States, and I was forced in a sense to learn English to go to school. I always, when we moved to California, I still confusing the language and the stuff, the culture, the whole. It was an isolation, and so I did that. In a sense, I felt it was a separation from my environment, and brought me more into drawing and painting, and that was my world. I didn't have to deal with everybody else. Okay, well, which is a typical Finnish thing. But anyway, so sisu, the word, like I've asked numerous Finnish friends, what's the real meaning? And one I thought, which was really great, Hannah said that, well, it's sort of an inordinate stubbornness, but in a sort of a general sense, it means guts. In other words, being able to push it out, just do it anyway to get it done. Okay, that's sisu. Anyway, but it's a cultural. The word conjures up a whole different thing. especially for Finns. And so there's the meanings that come through it. I'm just checking, I'm looking at questions here. Okay, new message, where? Do it anyway, okay, right. Yeah, you push it. Okay, damn it all. This may hurt, but it's got to get done. Okay. Anyway, but there's this whole fantasy thing that it really is. You're trying to push things outside of, but you can see how dramatically different. Now here, he's taking the same guy, taking and doing things in a different way. Each illustration, they're different. But in a sense, he's bringing the different cultural feeling and imagery to it. So K. Nielsen, look at the difference in the style. Same person. Now, so what we fantasy here is, now here, I think this is a really good example. You really are getting in this. Another one on the left is particularly a really the sense of, and I've talked about Hokusai, the idea of the wave. And so there's this really, and this patterns that he's created in there. Really, it's really different. He's bringing into it a very two-dimensional element to it. It's very, very 2D and yet 3D. He's got spaces in it. You can see the sun in the background coming up. It's really imaginative. It's really different. So you have all of this stuff that you look at that and it has very Oriental quality to it, just because of the design of just the wave. Now that could also, at the same time, that could be it's a very Nordic look. So some of the imagery can be a little big all over the place. Okay, now you look at this and we got these monsters down here. Well, again, you look at the difference of these characters now, and the uniqueness then of this light figure, and then we get the stars, and we got this stuff going on up here, and even the shape of that light in the background. I look at that and I see a head and thing. So there's this magic stuff that takes place within these things. So you constantly play with things. It's like the cultures, like what is Sinbad? Okay, Arabic, could be Iranian, whatever. The character and the Arabian Nights, the tales of the Arabian Nights. So those have been illustrated many, many times. Now, if you transpose that stuff into things, okay, I go to Japan quite often, and Japanese myths, the stories, completely different. They have all kinds of things that go on. You go to the temples, and you see there's a lot of times you will see a fox, a statue or a dog. But that has meaning. There's a story behind it. And so you start to take and see the cultural play of these things, like even color. We think of white is being sort of pure and what have you, and black is being bad. Well, it's the opposite. Okay, so again, the black is good, the white is not so good. Okay? So we taking in the idea of things, being able to have meaning as we look at the things, and that's like I say, I have these bag of rocks and things that I collected. I was teaching. I mentioned I taught in Denmark quite a bit. Well, I have a friend of mine, one of the teachers, well, several friends there. But I remember going in and he says, "Oh, you got to come over up into the studio. I want to show you something." Because often what we will do is we will trade rocks, rocks that have shapes and things to them. Okay. And he's going to show him. And there's a bookcase. And he had a log up there with this big split in the log. And he says, "Got a dragon up here." And on the side, they had a bunch of small branches cut up, pile of them. "Oh, you got this dinosaur and you got dinosaur poop on the floor there." It's immediately making this association between things. That's where the fun really gets into, when you start to look at things and pull the imagery out of it. Just making scribbles on a piece of paper and then drawing out of that. So all of these elements then are things that we take in and we work with. Okay, here I thought I would take and do a little fancy. Now these were drawings I did, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, drawing from clouds. But as you look at these things, they really take it on a whole new character. Now, I'm going to take and see, so they come through, and let's look at this. Wow. See, I actually started coming through, and I saw that as an eye. And now this becomes a whole different thing. So now you could see something like that. And you can come down and you start to see. And like taking and building out of this cloud. Now, this, what do we got here? I could turn this into, see, this becomes a hand or a claw, and give another one over here. And we can build out of this. We can take and have numerous feet that start to come out of here, and we can put claws on them. So, and then we can, wow, maybe this is a partially turtle. Maybe part of it is a turtle. Okay, a turtle who's got a big long tail. Let's take and give that some kind of a characteristic. And so you start to build on these things. Now, when you're doing something like that, I take a look at it and I say, well, gee, what about, I was talking about how things look. Now, what if I just change that eye and look down, and I've created an expression on that now? That's different. Maybe we could take this cloud here and we turn the eye going up and making this into a mouth now. And I'm going to so he's worried about this guy down underneath here. Oh, this guy is sort of a cool thing. He's got a body that can detach, and maybe it's held together with something like that. And we can come through, and they're going to turn these into feathers. And we come through, and we got a tail that's coming out. And you can start saying, well, maybe he's going to come up and maybe there's another one like this that's going to come up and grab him, or we're going to taking in, worrying about, oh, how's this going to take and go on? And maybe this guy's got two bodies. Okay, so you start, you start playing with it. And so every one of these drawings, see, oh, here, look at this. This guy here, it's like he's getting into an argument with this guy here. And so as you start becoming characters that you build on these things, and they can become a whole story. And maybe we got, this is the story here. We got, maybe you start to see that, let's put this into a context now. I'd throw it into a frame. And we got this guy down here. He's challenging these two guys. Maybe this guy's going to be taking and jumping up, or he's just standing up here and he's taking and looking down. And sort of a questioning mark here. I'm thinking, oh, start to add. See, the just taking and adding an expression to something, to as you're drawing, changes the character, makes it alive. You're building into this thing. Let me take and read here.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions, Glenn.
Yes.
Yeah, one says, hey, Glenn, what are your views on anime and Japanese manga and Frank Frazetta?
Oh, Frazetta, great. Yeah, this is one of the things. Now, I'm not absolutely sure. I've got a Frazetta book up there. In fact, I actually had meant to bring it in. The manga drawing and stuff, it's a story. Now, they are really, I've got a whole stack of books, manga books. Like I said, I go to Japan, so I'm collecting a few things to take and look at them. Manga, the Hokusai manga is people. That's what it is.
Wow.
And so that there's all that. So, but most of the time with regular Japanese books, like the comics, that's what they are. They're story. I find that the animated films, like the what do you call it? The thing, a lot of the fantasy stuff, the things flying and have you. I think they're really some of my favorite stuff. We've got a lot of the films here, and a lot of the. We don't have the television turned off. You have cut off. Okay, but I have the Japanese animated films. That's for the kids, and then the Disney thing, the Pixar stuff. When I worked on the Black Cauldron, for instance, my wife would not allow the kids to see it because it was too violent. So, but there's a violence. That's one of the things that we look at children's stories, where they come from. There are a lot of them are pretty violent. Little Red Riding Hood. That's not, that's not a. If you go back and read the Grimm's fairy tales, they are grim. A lot of them, but they're taking and telling stories. That's if we go back even farther, we think of the Greek tragedies, the plays. What they were meant to do was to take and communicate the normal everyday lessons of how to live a life or not to live a life. And so we find all kinds of things happening within these stories that are educational for the audience that they were meant to be shown to or played for. So it's a constant education. Art, See, visual art, whether it's theater, uh, has been used for education, for propaganda. And we've seen the use it has, because it's so powerful. Animated film today is the most, I can say, how can I put it? It's the most influential cultural imagery that we have. It's way, way more influential than, say, painting or anything else. People look at animated films. There was a thing in the news just the other day. They were talking about let's see, I can't think of his name now, but he's the ex-mayor of New York. Was Trump, and he was Trump's attorney.
Yeah, Giuliani.
Giuliani, yeah. And the comment about him was that Trump was always down on him because in these meetings, he would fall asleep, or no, it was on an airplane, that he would either fall asleep, but he's always on his iPad looking at cartoons, which I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was absolutely
That is hilarious.
and so you're building on these things.
There's another question, Glenn.
Sure.
Being a Finn in the United States, what is the general difference in fantasy art or illustration compared to Finland or the Nordic countries?
I have a book. That's supposedly, the title is Scandinavian Humor and Other Myths. Okay. I think the I'm not, I can't, the Finns are very individual. The Finns are not Swedish or Norwegian or Russian. We are not related at all to any of them. The Finns are Finnish people, are totally different. The language is totally different. It's totally unrelated to any of the other languages. And so it is a very, very different thing. So I'm not sure if I can say, because today everything is so intertwined. See, there's the Bayreuth, which is the German. Well, German and the languages of like the Vikings. To think of the Vikings, the Finns weren't Vikings. They didn't go Viking, which was raiding and traveling. Okay, there was here. I'm going to open up. Somebody took in. Yeah, that's the book. Okay.
Yeah, and there's one last question. I know we're getting close to closing here. They were asking if you had any tips on how you can push your concepts further. Like, what tips do you to just go further?
Yeah. Okay. The biggest thing I find that the difficulty that most students have is that they don't try enough variations. Is when I take, in other words, usually I just say, okay, we're in the business of making films, okay, and so we take and do thumbnails, we do storyboard, okay, take and I could do is give a talk on Michelangelo last week and this week, or 2 weeks ago. I do a 2-week thing every 2-hour thing every week on artists. And what I found was that the number of times taking and redoing and doing it over and over and over, even to taking and just flipping it over, looking at it the opposite side, but doing, and this is the problem. I have part of one of my classes, my essentials class, I have people do thumbnails. Well, invariably they'll do one thumbnail and then they will take and repolish it up a little bit, but without ever having explored the possibilities with that thing. And that's where one of my main criticisms is you don't do one thumbnail, you do 20 thumbnails. And you're constantly looking for how else can I look at how changing eye level, looking at it from a different angle, flipping it over to see how it works better, working with the light and dark pattern is you have to take and experience it from as many different possible ways as you can.
There's one other last question. They said, oh, before we go, where are the life drawing classes?
Vilppu Academy.
There you go. Vilppuacademy.com.
Thank you very much, everybody.